It's terrible that after 50 years it is behind closed doors.
The order was delivered without ceremony, negotiation, or warning. Princess Anne had permanently banned Queen Camilla from entering Queen Elizabeth's private drawing room, the deeply personal sanctuary, where the late monarch had written letters, received trusted relatives, and made decisions never recorded in official minutes. Camilla stood only feet from the entrance when the instruction was read aloud. Then Anne stepped forward, met her eyes, and made one thing unmistakably clear: the door would never open for her again. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move. She had arrived expecting a private viewing, not a rejection before palace staff. A senior household officer stood across the corridor, holding the access card that had allowed her through. The private drawing room was not an official chamber used for ceremonies. It was Elizabeth's personal sitting room, a protected space where family conversations, handwritten notes, and private decisions had remained beyond the reach of palace business. Anne approached without raising her voice. The princess had been entrusted with custodial authority, meaning responsibility for protecting her mother's private rooms, controlling access, and preserving anything marked as personal. She took the card from the officer's hand, slipped it into her coat pocket, and ordered that Camilla's name be removed permanently from the authorized list. Humiliation struck before anger. Camilla asked whether Charles had approved the command, but the queen consort sensed the answer would not save her. Anne held her gaze and said the responsibility belonged to her. The decision was final. The king's wife had been denied entry, and every person in that corridor understood the deeper insult. Rank had failed to open a royal door. Anne felt no victory. Beneath her composure sat grief, unresolved. That room still carried her mother's presence through familiar photographs, correspondence boxes, and objects left almost exactly where Elizabeth had last known them. To the princess, protecting it was not palace administration. It was the last promise she could keep. The ban had not begun with wounded pride. During Camilla's previous visit, something inside the room had been opened, examined, and nearly removed. Anne now held the proof, a small inventory card bearing Elizabeth's handwriting. When the lock turned, Camilla noticed it between the princess's fingers, and her expression visibly changed. Anne knew what had happened. Camilla knew she had been discovered. But to understand why Anne's decision cut so deeply, the people standing on either side of that locked door must first be understood not as titles, but as two women fighting over belonging, memory, and a place neither was willing to surrender. Behind the royal titles stood two women carrying very different relationships with the same crown. Anne saw the room as the final private territory of a mother she had served, protected, and quietly mourned. Camilla saw exclusion from it as proof that years after entering the royal family, some doors remained closed to her. Their struggle was not really about furniture or access. It was about legitimacy, and which woman had the right to define Queen Elizabeth's memory. Anne entered the private drawing room alone and closed the door behind her. The space had once belonged to Queen Elizabeth, but its meaning now went far beyond royal ownership. It held the quiet remains of a relationship built through decades of service, discipline, and unspoken affection. The princess had rarely displayed grief in public. She had stood straight through ceremonies, carried out duties, and protected the institution her mother had devoted her life to. But beside the empty chair, that strength finally weakened. Anne placed one hand against its wooden back. For several seconds, she said nothing. The daughter who had refused to collapse before the world allowed herself one private moment of pain. Protecting the room was not about controlling the past. It was about stopping that past from being changed by people who had not shared it. Camilla carried a very different wound. She removed her gloves in another part of the palace and dropped them sharply onto a table. Then she asked her aide whether household employees had witnessed the confrontation. The answer came quietly. Yes, several had seen everything. Humiliation hardened her expression. As queen consort, the wife of the reigning king who supports him, but does not hold his constitutional power, she believed her position beside Charles should have granted her limited access to spaces connected to the former monarch. Anne's order had reduced her from queen to outsider before palace staff. The title remained. The acceptance did not. Camilla believed the princess had chosen the most public possible way to punish her. Anne believed the queen consort still confused inherited status with emotional belonging. Marriage to Charles had given Camilla rank, influence, and responsibility. It had not given her ownership of Elizabeth's private memories. Charles had tried to prevent this exact rupture. The king had previously approved limited, supervised access as an informal compromise, meaning a private family arrangement rather than an official royal order. Anne had now destroyed that understanding with one permanent command. William heard about the ban before the day ended. The prince did not ask whether Camilla was angry or whether Charles would intervene. He asked only one question: what did she touch during her last visit? The answer led back to a single afternoon, a quiet visit that began as household administration and ended as the moment Anne decided Camilla could never be trusted inside the room again. The point of no return came 3 weeks earlier, during what was supposed to be a carefully supervised inspection of the late queen's preserved rooms. Camilla entered with 2 household officials and a written list of objects being considered for transfer. Nothing appeared unusual until one attendant stepped into the adjoining corridor. In that brief absence, Camilla opened a small cabinet Anne had explicitly marked as private. What she found inside and what she tried to do next transformed quiet suspicion into open war. Camilla had requested the inspection after several objects were proposed for use in a reception area belonging to the present queen's household. The palace review was meant to decide what should remain untouched, what could enter the royal archive, a protected collection of important family records and belongings, and what might appear during future memorial events. To her, the process looked administrative. To Anne, every decision carried the risk of erasing something personal. Camilla moved toward the correspondence cabinet when the attendant briefly left the room. A handwritten restriction on the inventory clearly marked it as private, yet the queen consort opened it anyway. Inside lay a narrow velvet case. She lifted it out, opened it, and found a brooch beside a note written by Queen Elizabeth herself. The message was unmistakable. The brooch was to remain with Anne and later pass to Princess Charlotte. That instruction mattered because it separated the piece from ordinary palace property. It was a private family gift, protected by the late monarch's own words. Camilla questioned the arrangement the moment the attendant returned. She asked why such an important jewel should bypass the reigning queen's household, then instructed the official to place the case with objects awaiting reassignment. The attendant refused. Silence hardened the room. Camilla lowered her voice and insisted that her authority should be enough. She did not know the inventory officer had already contacted Anne through a documented internal message, warning that the private cabinet had been opened. Anne arrived before Camilla could leave. The princess saw the cabinet door ajar, the velvet case resting separately, and her mother's note placed beside it. She did not argue before the staff. She gathered each item herself, returned them to the cabinet, and asked the officials to record exactly what had happened. The deeper betrayal emerged later. Anne discovered that Camilla's office had requested a revised inventory that removed all mention of Elizabeth's handwritten instruction. Without that note, Charlotte's future claim to the brooch would appear far weaker. Anne now possessed the original card, the altered list, and the attendant's signed account. She arranged a private meeting immediately. The next encounter would not take place in a corridor or before watching servants. Anne wanted Camilla alone, face to face, with the disputed heirloom placed directly between them. The velvet case sat unopened between them as Anne closed the door. There were no aides, no private secretaries, and no carefully rehearsed palace phrases to soften what followed. Camilla remained standing, refusing the chair offered to her. Anne placed the original inventory note beside the revised version and asked why her mother's instruction had disappeared. For several seconds, the Queen said nothing. Then she delivered an answer that turned a dispute over access into a direct challenge over royal authority. Anne kept her voice controlled as she pointed to the two records. The original inventory was the official list showing where each private object belonged and what instructions had been attached to it. The amended version requested by Camilla's office removed the handwritten note completely. To the princess, that omission was not a clerical mistake. It was an attempt to turn her mother's private gift into ordinary household property. Camilla pushed the revised page back across the table. She said the monarchy could not preserve every personal instruction forever, especially when a new reign had already begun. Anne immediately placed her palm over the paper, stopping it before it reached the edge. The accusation came without softness. Anne told her she had treated Queen Elizabeth's memory like an administrative problem that needed to be cleared away. Camilla answered that the current royal household could not remain trapped by decisions made years earlier. The Queen Consort insisted she was trying to protect the authority of the present reign, not erase the past. Camilla's restraint finally broke. She said she had spent years being reminded that she was not Elizabeth, not Diana, and never the woman the public truly wanted. Yet whenever the crown demanded loyalty, discipline, or sacrifice, she was expected to carry the burden without complaint. Her title brought responsibility, but inside the family, acceptance still seemed conditional. Anne's anger gave way to something colder and more painful. The princess told her that acceptance could not be demanded by opening a dead woman's cabinet and rewriting what had been found inside. Her mother's final wishes were not obstacles, they were promises. Camilla then admitted that Charles knew she wanted selected objects transferred. She stopped short of saying the king had approved removing the note, but his name now stood dangerously close to the dispute. Anne closed the velvet case and rose. Camilla's access was permanently withdrawn. The original inventory would remain intact, and Charlotte's inheritance would be protected personally. Camilla left and immediately requested an audience with Charles, convinced one command could reverse the ban. The confrontation had exposed the wound, but the next battle would determine whether Anne's words carried real authority or whether Charles would overrule his sister to protect his wife. Camilla entered Charles's private office, expecting intervention. Instead, she found him seated beside a sealed file bearing his mother's personal cipher. Anne had anticipated the appeal and delivered the documents first. The king read in silence, as his wife demanded that the ban be lifted. Yet the authority surrounding the room was more complicated than rank alone. Elizabeth had left instructions, custodial responsibilities, and one unmistakable safeguard, ensuring that even the monarch could not casually erase her final private wishes. Charles turned to the first page again. The custodial arrangement was a private system, placing Elizabeth's personal rooms and selected belongings under the care of Anne and trusted archive officials. It separated family gifts, handwritten instructions, and preserved correspondence from ordinary property used by the reigning household. Anne therefore controlled access records, preservation decisions, and anything her mother had clearly marked as personal. Camilla watched him read the same instruction twice. The king removed his glasses, placed them beside the file, and said nothing. She had expected immediate support. Instead, every second of silence made the distance between them feel wider. Camilla argued that Anne's order created a rival center of power inside the palace. Allowing the princess to exclude the reigning queen, she warned, did not merely humiliate her. It weakened Charles by suggesting that his own household could be overruled by a private family arrangement. Charles felt the pressure from both sides. Loyalty to his wife demanded that he defend her dignity, but loyalty to his mother required him to protect instructions she had deliberately preserved. The monarch finally asked whether Camilla had told her staff to remove the handwritten note from the revised inventory. Camilla hesitated. That pause answered more than words could. Charles opened the sealed instruction once more. It confirmed that Anne could permanently restrict access if anyone interfered with preserved letters, private gifts, or inheritance directions. The princess had not seized authority. Elizabeth had given it to her. The next page deepened the shock. William had been named as a secondary witness in disputes involving objects intended for George, Charlotte, or Louis. The prince's role meant Anne's decision was linked not only to the past, but to the future reign. Charles closed the file. He told Camilla he would not overturn the ban. Camilla rose slowly, waiting for him to soften the decision. The king kept his eyes on the sealed papers. The refusal spread through the household within hours. Access codes changed. Staff assignments shifted. Camilla's name disappeared from protected routes. By nightfall, the ban was no longer an angry declaration between two women. It had become a functioning palace order, altering routines, loyalties, and Camilla's place within the royal household. The first consequence appeared on Camilla's schedule the following morning. A planned visit to the preserved royal apartments had vanished. Then an aide informed her that the corridor outside Elizabeth's drawing room was no longer included in her access route. Nothing dramatic was announced, yet the palace itself seemed to move around her doors redirected. Staff reassigned, conversations shortened. For the first time since becoming queen, Camilla felt the machinery of the monarchy quietly refusing to yield. Camilla sat alone with her tea as she studied the amended schedule. The preserved royal apartments were private rooms maintained in their original condition because of their family and historical importance. She read the page twice, found the missing visit, and pressed its edge so hard that the paper bent beneath her fingers. The exclusion was no longer private. It had entered her daily life. Camilla summoned her private secretary and demanded to know who had changed the route. The answer came carefully. The Household Preservation Office had issued the instruction, and Charles had acknowledged it. Her anger disappeared into stunned silence. The king had not merely refused to defend her. He had allowed the order to become active palace procedure. The consequences deepened quickly. Household security replaced the drawing room's access code and released a new list, naming Anne, Charles, William, Catherine, selected archivists, and approved attendants. Camilla's name was missing. An archivist was a specialist responsible for protecting important records and historical objects, and even those officials could enter only under strict conditions. Camilla's staff divided around her. Some called the exclusion degrading and urged the queen consort to challenge it formally. Others warned that another fight could expose the altered inventory, the missing note, and the full story of the cabinet to the public. She now faced a brutal choice: accept humiliation quietly or risk a scandal she might not control. Anne felt no triumph. The princess inspected the restored room and found every object returned to its recorded place. Yet when she noticed the faint indentation where the velvet case had rested, relief turned into pain. Her mother's instruction had nearly vanished because one line was removed from a list. William privately confirmed the outcome during a recorded family discussion. Charlotte would receive the brooch exactly as Elizabeth intended. The prince's support transformed Anne's decision from personal resistance into protection, stretching from the former reign toward the future one. Camilla then learned that the attendant who had refused her instruction had been moved under Anne's direct protection. The official could no longer be dismissed or pressured by her household. That evening, Camilla contacted Anne. She asked for no access, no documents, and no intervention from Charles or William. She asked only for an honest conversation. With palace authorities stripped away and every formal route exhausted, the conflict returned to its most human form. Two women alone, facing the grief and resentment hidden beneath the locked door. They met after dusk in a small sitting room, far from the disputed corridor. No files lay between them. No aides waited outside the door. Camilla arrived without demanding that the order be reversed. and Anne entered without the velvet case. For the first time since the crisis began, neither woman spoke as an official representative of the crown. They spoke as a widow and a daughter, each carrying years of judgment, grief, resentment, and fear that the monarchy had never allowed them to express. Anne poured tea for both of them, but left Camilla's cup untouched on the table. The silence was deliberate. No formal statement, meaning an official palace explanation approved for public release, could repair what had happened. Only a direct admission could begin that work. Camilla finally acknowledged that the revised inventory request had come from her office. The Queen Consort admitted she wanted the brooch considered for present royal use before it eventually passed to Charlotte. She did not deny opening the cabinet. She did not blame the attendant. Then she said the words Anne had been waiting to hear. It had been wrong. Anne pushed the untouched cup toward her. Camilla spoke more openly after that. Becoming queen had not erased decades of public hostility or the constant comparisons surrounding her. Every preserved room connected to Elizabeth reminded her that the late monarch's emotional authority remained stronger than her own. She had believed greater control over royal spaces might finally make her feel secure. Instead, it had exposed how uncertain she still was. Anne listened, but grief kept her guarded. The princess explained that a new reign did not end a daughter's mourning. Every object moved without consultation, felt like another piece of her mother being taken away. The drawing room mattered because it remained one place where Elizabeth's private wishes had not yet been reshaped by duty, politics, or convenience. Camilla offered no further excuse. She asked Anne to preserve the original note beside the brooch and agreed to provide a written acknowledgement, confirming that Charlotte's future ownership would never again be challenged. The promise changed the tone between them, but it did not erase the damage. Anne's expression softened. Still, she refused to lift the ban. Forgiveness and access were not the same thing, she said. Trust could begin healing, while a boundary remained permanent. Anne then revealed the true purpose of the restriction through that private conversation. It was never designed to attack Camilla's title. It proved that no queen, king, or future heir could override a clearly expressed family wish. The women left separately. Camilla immediately instructed her office to withdraw every transfer request connected to Elizabeth's private rooms. The private war had finally cooled, but the locked door had already become a national symbol, and outside the palace, Britain was preparing its own judgment. By sunrise, the story had escaped the palace walls. It was no longer merely a dispute involving Anne, Camilla, and a private room. It had become a public argument about memory, entitlement, and whether royal rank should have limits. Broadcasters displayed photographs of Elizabeth beside images of the closed palace corridor. Crowds gathered near Windsor, some defending the Queen, others praising the princess. One locked door now represented a much larger question, but the palace already knew its final answer. The palace released a carefully worded statement before the morning broadcasts ended. It confirmed that access to Queen Elizabeth's preserved private rooms remained governed by custodial instructions, meaning written directions controlling who could enter and how personal belongings must be protected. The message avoided every painful detail of the confrontation, yet its emphasis on respecting private wishes made the outcome unmistakable. Anne's order would stand. A national newspaper captured the mood in one unforgettable front page. It placed Anne beside an image of the drawing room's closed white and gold door and printed the headline, "The Princess Who Guarded Her Mother's Last Wish." The words transformed a private family dispute into a symbol of loyalty, grief, and resistance. Outside Windsor Castle, a small crowd gathered near the public entrance. Some carried flowers. Others argued quietly over whether a reigning queen should ever face such exclusion. One elderly woman placed white blooms beneath the railings with a card reading, "A daughter remembered what a crown could not replace." That message spread across broadcasts within hours. William watched the coverage privately and lowered the volume when commentators mentioned Charlotte. The prince felt relief that her inheritance had been protected without dragging the child into the conflict. He also understood that the dispute had become larger than the brooch. It now concerned the limits of royal power. Camilla's supporters called the ban unnecessarily humiliating. They argued that excluding the queen weakened her public standing and created division inside the monarchy. Anne's defenders answered with a harsher point. Authority meant nothing if it could erase the clearly expressed wishes of the dead. Camilla then changed the direction of the debate. Through the palace's documented statement, she confirmed that she had approved the withdrawal of every pending transfer request linked to Elizabeth's private rooms. The decision prevented a deeper constitutional struggle and showed that she had accepted the boundary. Anne refused to celebrate. The princess returned to the drawing room, adjusted one family photograph, and left the newspaper coverage unopened. Only one question remained, not whether the door would reopen, but what its permanent closure meant for them all. The answer did not lie in victory or defeat. It lay in what Anne protected, what Camilla finally accepted, and what the monarchy learned when personal memory proved stronger than royal privilege. The door remained locked. There was no reversal, no quiet compromise, and no later instruction restoring Camilla's access. Princess Anne's order became permanent not because she wished to humiliate the Queen, but because Queen Elizabeth's private intentions had come dangerously close to being rewritten. Camilla accepted the restriction, Charles upheld it, and Charlotte's inheritance was secured. What began as a painful family confrontation ended as something larger. Proof that within the monarchy, memory could still command respect, even after power had changed hands. Anne recorded the permanent restriction herself. The preserved room access register, a formal book listing who may enter protected royal spaces, carried one final entry beneath her signature. The princess closed it without celebration and returned it to the archive. The brooch, velvet case, and Elizabeth's handwritten note were then sealed together, under terms guaranteeing that the jewel would eventually pass to Charlotte. Camilla walked past the corridor one final time while traveling to another engagement. The queen consort slowed when she noticed the guarded entrance, but she did not approach it. She asked no questions and made no final demand. That restraint revealed how deeply the experience had changed her. Camilla now understood what rank could and could not provide. Becoming queen had given her influence, visibility, and responsibility beside Charles. It had not given her ownership of every memory created before she entered the family. Accepting that limit became more difficult than losing access itself. Anne returned to the drawing room alone. The princess sat near her mother's familiar chair and allowed the silence to settle around her. She felt no triumph over Camilla. She felt only relief that one handwritten instruction had survived, and that Elizabeth's voice had not disappeared beneath the authority of a new reign. Charles carried his own pain. The king's refusal to overturn the ban had forced him to choose between defending his wife and protecting his mother's final wish. He accepted that loyalty to Camilla could not demand the erasure of Elizabeth's words. William saw the decision as a lesson for the monarchy he might one day lead. The prince understood that inheritance was not merely possession, and that authority without restraint could become violation. Charlotte remained protected from the details, never used as a weapon in the conflict surrounding her future gift. Camilla never entered Queen Elizabeth's private drawing room again. Anne preserved the sanctuary, the heirloom remained secured for Charlotte, and the family accepted the permanent boundary. There was no unfinished battle. The crown inherited power, but it did not inherit the right to rewrite every memory. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.